Hi, my name's Gareth. I'm the owner of Carvetii Coffee, and today I'm going to talk about brewing using the humble Cafetiere. It's probably the first brewing method I ever came across, and I remember the days when I used to buy Taylor's Lazy Sunday Cafetiere ground coffee, and every Sunday morning I'd be brewing my cafetieres at home. I really thought I was the bee's knees in those days. Things moved on a lot for me since then, but I still enjoy coming back to brewing using a cafetiere. Before we get started, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things I've got on the bench here that I'm going to be using today. First, obviously, I've got my cafetiere. And you might also notice I've got a set of scales on the bench. I tend to weigh both my beans and my water onto scales for that extra degree of accuracy. I'm lucky with these scales, they've got a built-in timer. So when it comes to the timing element of this, I can use my scales to see clearly how long the coffee's been brewing for. Need a spoon. In this case, I need a coffee grinder because I really would encourage you to grind your beans fresh, but we'll come back to that shortly. And I've got a kettle for my water. And finally, probably most importantly, I have my cup ready to enjoy the fruits of my labours today. I've already ground my coffee. I did try doing this video by grinding the coffee as I was talking, but it didn't work so well. So this is just being ground. And what I'll do is I'll get the cafetiere brewing, and I'll talk a little bit about some hints and tips whilst we're waiting for it to brew. So I have in here 38 grams of coffee. I use a brew ratio of 75 grams of coffee to every litre of water. So because I've got a half litre cafetiere, I've gone for my 38 grams of coffee. And I'm going to go straight in with the water. So 500 grams or 500 mils of water going straight in, which will mostly fill this cafetiere. And my scales here give me a guide, slowing down towards the end, and there we are. I'll also start my time on the scales at the same time. Now it's really important at this stage to thoroughly stir this cafetiere. I want to make sure all those grounds are properly saturated and there's no dry grounds left in there. And now it's just a case of waiting for it to brew. I always go for a 4-minute brew time. Generally you can go 3 to 5 minutes, but I find by being consistent with my 4 minutes, I can play around with other variables such as grind settings and just stick to that simple fixed 4-minute brew. 500 ml cafetiere here. You can get other sizes obviously. This holds about 250 mils, so I put about 19 grams of coffee into this cafetiere. Little note about water temperature. I actually used boiling water straight out the kettle for this cafetiere. And for some people that might seem a little bit hot, but I've done a few tests on this. By the time you've poured your water into the cafetiere, the temperature of the coffee, the temperature of the cafetiere itself, even if you've preheated it, and even the action of pouring water will all drop the temperature of your water. And in my tests, I found out that 100-degree water here, boiling water here, by the time I'd filled my cafetiere, it had dropped down to 94 degrees. Some best bit of advice I can give you in terms of water temperature is start as hot as possible over here to retain as much temperature as you can in the cafetiere itself. And a little bit of note about the grind setting. Now for some people, whole bean coffee is their chosen way of buying coffee, and some prefer the convenience of pre-ground. And I'll deal with each in turn. I'm a big fan of whole bean coffee, I have to say. You're going to get the freshest tasting coffee, you're going to get the most flavour out of your coffee if you buy whole bean. And to be honest with you, whilst I was grinding this, I could smell the aroma coming off of this coffee. And you get that kind of anticipation of what's about to happen. So as far as possible, try and buy whole bean and grind as you need it. I use quite a gritty grind here, somewhere between caster and granulated sugar. You don't want it too chunky, you don't want it too fine. It's going to steep for 4 minutes. So chunky enough to get the flavour out really. The best thing you can do is experiment. Stick to your 4-minute brew window, try a grind that's a bit finer, try a grind that's a bit coarser, and you'll end up developing your own preference. If you've bought pre-ground coffee, then you can play with the brew time, using the 3 to 5 minute window. Try a slightly shorter brew, try a slightly longer brew, and that will give you a sense about where your preference lies as well. And I can't encourage you enough to just experiment, try something different to see which or where your preferences lie. Do you prefer a longer brew time? Do you prefer a quicker brew time? We're not far off now from our time, and you may have noticed at the top of the cafetiere we have got what we call a crust forming, and this is coffee that's floating and also being held in place by gases that were in the bean. They're the residue of roasting, and as we poured our water on, the gases released and got trapped in this kind of raft of grounds here. And now that my 4 minutes is over, the first thing I want to do is I want to break this crust, which will release the gases out of the coffee. So there we go, 4 minutes, and I just gently tap the top of the coffee using my spoon. And the grounds will drop straight down, and I'll be left with this kind of pale foam on top of my cafetiere. I prefer to remove this, so I'll just get a spoon and try and take as much of it off as I can. There are super slick techniques for doing this using a couple of spoons, but to be honest with you, it's just as good to do it with a single spoon. At this point, you've got two options: either plunge straight away or wait for a couple of minutes. If you wait for a couple of minutes, more and more of that sediment you get in cafetières is going to settle down to the bottom, and you'll end up with a cleaner cup. For this one, I'm just going to plunge straight away. I can deal with the sediment. It doesn't really bother me that much. And because we've broken that crust and most of the grounds are sunk down, you should find the actual pressing of the plunger really simple. And I'm going to stop before I get down to the coffee, leaving a little gap at the bottom. And then all you need to do is pour straight away. So I've got a cup there, and I've got some for later. And if I'm going to do this, I'm going to save some for later. I'll decant this into a thermos flask. I won't leave it in the cafetiere. Otherwise, it will continue to brew, it will continue to stew, and I won't get such a nice cup afterwards. So there we are. Real simple way of brewing coffee. A few little hints and tips thrown in there for you. Have a go, try it at home. And if you want to share your brewing and the things you found out, please drop me comments, get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, if you can share and like this video, I would be really grateful. Thanks for listening.